Welcome back to Shadowy Stories. I'm a pilot for a well-known cargo airline, and this is the strangest experience of my flying career. I don't know what to do. It was a pretty standard day. I checked my flight schedule on my laptop. A planned trip from Miami to San Juan and back. This was good news for me. At least I could be home that night. My co-pilot was a guy named David. Seemed decent enough during our pre-flight briefing. We boarded our modified Boeing 737. The first leg of the flight was normal. No turbulence. Just air traffic control rerouting us over Cuba to avoid what looked like a developing storm over the ocean. We're missing the Bermuda Triangle, David said, looking at his electronic charts. Do you believe in those stories? I asked. I'd flown this route a few times and never noticed anything different about the so-called Bermuda Triangle. I think they're all made up. Some of them are real, David said, a serious look on his face. He could tell what I was thinking. Do you know why we're diverted over Cuba? Storms, I said. We left it at that. The rest of the flight was uneventful. As we approached our destination, we prepared for landing. After we touched down safely, the ground crew refueled the plane. As the ground crew began refueling, a mechanic approached me, frowning. Captain, we seem to have a minor issue. Ugh, I sighed. Company policy was to inspect and ground the plane for any suspected issues. Who knows how long this will take? I was hoping to get home after this leg. I called the dispatcher. After consulting the engineering team, they agreed to an inspection. David and I grabbed some lunch at the airport and killed time in the crew lounge, scrolling through our phones. Long story short, about 6 hours later, the mechanics gave us the all clear to return. It was getting late, dusk settling in. I was kind of happy we were leaving late since it meant a later start the next day. A little extra rest. We'll be flying right over the Bermuda Triangle this time, David said, looking apprehensive. He paused, then added, I get a weird feeling every time we fly over this area. He looked spooked in the dim light. It's probably just the vastness of the ocean, I reassured him. It's pretty dark out there. Right after I said that, things started to change. The plane shuddered. I frowned. That's a strong wind. David looked scared. I don't know, Captain. It doesn't feel natural. The 737 began to shake uncontrollably. The plane started to descend, my heart leaping into my throat. At night, with nothing but darkness outside the windshield, there was no visual reference, just the instruments. I started scanning the console, trying to figure out what was wrong. Had the engineers missed something? I gripped the controls, trying to pull the nose up, easing back on the throttle. David, pull back the throttles, I yelled. I wrestled with the controls. After a terrifying 2 minutes, the plane stabilized, and we both breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe the storm clouds from earlier had created some kind of downdraft, and we'd just been unlucky enough to hit it. But what we saw next sent chills down our spines. Normally, we wouldn't see clouds clearly at night unless the moon was bright. But below us, the cloud cover was forming a blood-red swirling vortex. To my horror, the plane started to tremble, and the clouds began to spin. David and I were sweating now. The nose of the plane dipped towards the vortex, as if being pulled towards the mouth of hell. I frantically tried to control the plane, but some other force seemed to be fighting me for control. The controls were unresponsive. We were descending rapidly. David and I exchanged a terrified look. We're going down. Is this what's been killing people? This unexplainable weather anomaly that even our smartest scientists can't figure out. Then something even stranger happened. Before we knew it, the vortex seemed to spit us out, like we'd been teleported to another dimension. We were now flying over a completely different landscape. The sky was darker, a swirling mix of black and red clouds, and an eerie silence filled the air. I didn't understand what had happened. I was still trying to process it when David yelled, "Look down." I peered out the window. The land below looked like the surface of Mars. "What the hell just happened?" David asked, his voice shaky. "I don't know, but I think we need to get out of here now," I replied. I tried to turn the plane around, to head back, but the controls were still unresponsive. We were wrapped in this unknown place. Worse, our navigation systems were blank, showing nothing. I tried using the plane's satellite call system, but it was dead. Panic set in. We were screwed. That's when things got even weirder. I saw something moving outside the window, something that shouldn't exist. My brain couldn't comprehend what I was seeing. It was like a shadow, but with strange contours, moving rapidly towards us. A gray fog started to envelop the plane, swirling around it against the backdrop of black and red clouds. "David, do you see that?" I asked, my voice trembling. He stared out the window, his eyes wide with terror. "What in the hell is that?" The shadow figure was now less than a meter from the plane, like it was about to breach the cockpit. Even though we were still flying, I felt a cold wind from outside. The gray fog reminded me of something I'd read about in books, about the Grim Reaper, always accompanied by gray smoke. Cold sweat dripped down my forehead. The shadow figure extended a long, spindly finger and tapped on the window. I recoiled instinctively. Then it was gone. We both screamed. Just then, we heard a voice, seemingly coming from inside the plane. "I've been waiting for you." David and I looked at each other, both frozen in terror. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I was losing my voice. We got no response, but we could sense an unnatural presence in the cockpit. The temperature plummeted. My body went limp. I was too scared to turn around. I saw a swirling gray fog filling the cockpit. That's the last thing I remember before I passed out. When I came to, I found we were back over Earth, flying over the same spot where we had encountered the portal. I immediately disengaged autopilot and took control of the plane. The rest of the flight was silent. I wanted to ask David if it had been a dream, but we both knew it was real. After we landed safely, David resigned that same day, but I stayed. We both remembered it clearly but decided not to mention it to anyone. The company didn't report anything unusual. I didn't want to see a therapist. I didn't want to lose my job over this. I needed this job. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel of my Ford pickup, terrified, not daring to look back. I stopped at a fast food joint, ordered, and ate in my truck. Once I got home, I had this feeling of being watched, like I couldn't shake it. I'd lived alone most of my life, never felt this way before. I showered and went to bed. After tossing and turning for an hour, I finally drifted off. I was plagued by dreams of the shadow figure, mocking my disbelief in the supernatural, telling me I would pay. I dreamt of being trapped in the other dimension, unable to escape. I woke up with a gasp, my pillow soaked with sweat. I tried to call David, but he refused to talk about it. I ate some cornflakes, wondering who I could talk to. Scrolling through my contacts, I had a thought. I could call Alan. Alan was an investigator for the NTSB. He was a loner like me. We had hung out a few times, talked regularly. He wouldn't think I was crazy. So I called him, recounted my experience. Alan was usually laid back, but after hearing my story, he turned serious. He told me to stay put, not to leave my house. He promised to be there within 2 hours, with his team. I had some coffee, thinking I'd check my schedule on my laptop, see if my shifts had been pushed back. I needed some time off after all this. As I entered my bedroom, the door slammed shut behind me. I looked around, a chilling feeling creeping into my veins. The windows were closed, so it couldn't have been the wind. I tiptoed forward. Then, the gray fog appeared in my room, the same as on the plane. I froze, rooted to the spot. The entity lunged at me, what looked like chains made of dark gray fog wrapping around my ankles. A searing pain shot through my ankle, jolting me of action. I screamed, turning and throwing the door open, slamming it shut behind me. The entity hit the door with a screech like a hawk. I fumbled for my keys, ran into the garage, and scrambled into my pickup. I looked back at the house. Had it come back with me yesterday. My ankle felt like it was burning. The skin red and blistered where the fog had touched it. I wanted to drive away now, but Alan had told me to stay. After a moment of struggle, I decided to wait for him in the truck. I grabbed a bottle of water from the car, poured some onto a cloth, and wrapped it around my ankle. After about 2 hours of anxious waiting, Alan arrived. He parked his car on the curb, followed by a black Cadillac. Alan and his team emerged, carrying a duffel bag. I got out of the truck. "Thanks for coming all this way, man," I said, pumping his hand. Alan nodded at the 2 men emerging from the Cadillac. They were obviously government officials, in black suits and ties, wearing sunglasses. One had a thick mustache. The other looked devoid of any emotion. They stood, waiting for Alan to make introductions. "Daniel, these are my colleagues from another department. Mustache is Mike, and the other one is Peter, FBI. I'm guessing," I said to them. They didn't confirm or deny. "I assume Alan filled you in," I said, gesturing towards my house. They went over to take pictures of the house. I wanted to follow them inside. Alan shook his head. "It's best you don't go back in there right now. I can't even go inside my own house." Alan told me they would arrange accommodation for me and had already smoothed things over with my airline, using a plausible excuse. I just needed to rest. At least my job was safe. I breathed a sigh of relief. "Any word from David?" I asked casually. "The Coppola? He's left the state. We're keeping an eye on him, too." I asked them how long the investigation of my house would take, since I didn't want to stand out in the street, attracting the attention of the neighbors. Alan said they needed to take some energy readings. "Can I at least go in and grab my bag?" I asked. "Better not. I'll have someone send your belongings to your accommodation." I shook his hand again, and then I was driven to a motel. I had lunch there. The motel was decent enough, but as I surveyed the room, a sense of unease settled over me. I'd stayed in plenty of hotels as a pilot, but I'd never experienced this feeling before. The hairs on the back of my neck prickling, like I wasn't alone. I shrugged it off, drawing the curtains. Alan had given me a device, told me to use it in case of an emergency. I didn't really understand what that meant. The device looked like an old Nokia phone. I decided to distract myself, put on a movie. I almost dropped my phone when I opened the app. A woman's face, smiling maniacally, filled the screen. Then I realized it was just a movie poster on the home page. Still, it unnerved me. I tossed my phone onto the nightstand and lay down. In my dreams, the shadow figure returned, greeting me, engulfing me in its shadowy embrace. I was back in the other dimension, struggling to escape. The figure leaned in, mocking me. I strained to see what it was, but all I saw was blackness and glowing eyes. I tried to wake up. The more I struggled, the harder the figure laughed. I woke up with a jolt, drenched in sweat. I reached up to wipe my brow, but to my horror, I couldn't move my arms. I tried to move my legs, but they were like lead. I looked down at my body. It was covered in a gray fog. Something told me to look at the armchair. I whimpered. Sitting there was the shadow figure. This time, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was shrouded in the gray fog, its face featureless except for the glowing eyes. A gash appeared below the eyes. It smiled, revealing sharp, jagged teeth, nothing like a human's. It groaned, a hissing sound like nails on a chalkboard. What do you want?" I croaked. "Don't you remember?" it asked. I didn't know what it was referring to. I cursed myself for not putting the emergency device on the nightstand. The entity stood and approached me. I stared, transfixed. Then its face changed. It became Rachel. Rachel, FBI. A voice boomed from outside the room. The entity hissed and vanished with the gray fog. The door burst open, and Alan rushed in, followed by a group of people. Thank God this place hits reception. I sat up, looking at Alan. He explained. That emergency device detects energy fluctuations. We received an alert. The motel's energy signature matched the one at your house. So we came immediately. I recounted everything, especially the entity's transformation into Rachel. Let me tell you about Rachel. I began. Rachel was the absolute goddess I met when I first started working at the airline. She was a pilot herself. Cargo for me, usually charter flights for her. I saw her in the airport cafeteria and fell instantly in love. I shyly approached her, asked her out. To my surprise, she agreed. We had a few coffees, then decided to date. I loved her deeply. She was the perfect partner, until she vanished. I won't go into how devastated I was. I went to the police, but they dismissed it, said she was an adult. I went to her employer. To my shock, the airline's upper management seemed indifferent. Years passed. Rachel never reappeared. Alan was silent, looking out the window, his back to me. Then Peter came in, handed me a file, and stood there. Typical government style. The heading read, FBI and NTSB. It stated, 6 years ago, the NTSB received an alert regarding a missing aircraft over the Bermuda Triangle. The pilot of the aircraft was Rachel. I gripped the armrest, staring at Alan. You covered it up, didn't you? You've been covering up every disappearance in the Bermuda Triangle. Alan didn't argue. He remained silent for a long moment. Then let's work together. Find Rachel, and get to the bottom of this, okay? What do I have to do? Fly over the Bermuda Triangle again. With us. I swallowed hard, but I agreed. For myself. And for Rachel. I was told not to bring anything. Not even my clothes. They bought me new clothes. New glasses. Gave me a brand new phone. We spent 8 hours traveling by foot. Alan said it was for safety precautions, to avoid any incidents on the way to the Bermuda Triangle. Everything I had on me was new. I kept only one thing, an amulet pendant Rachel had given me long ago. She said her mother believed it was good luck. I wanted to hold it, to calm my nerves, but as soon as my skin touched the amulet, I felt a burning pain and dropped it instinctively. It landed on the floor. Wisps of what looked like gray smoke curling from it. The others gasped, rushing over, but the smoke vanished as if by magic. Alan looked at me, seemingly displeased that I hadn't mentioned the amulet. He sighed, telling me the entity might have attached itself to my belongings. It seemed part of it had latched onto the amulet, which was probably how it had been able to take Rachel's form. He took the amulet from me, placed it in a box. We'll need to screen you again before boarding, Alan said. I understood. Without incident, Alan and his team took me to an undisclosed location. At the gate, security checked their credentials and waved us through. We didn't enter through the main entrance like regular people. We were led to an underground parking garage. They parked the Cadillac. We got out and stepped into an elevator. Alan inserted a card into a rear, and the elevator started moving. The digital display didn't show any floor numbers. I had a feeling I was heading to a highly classified facility when the elevator doors opened. I was right. We stepped out into a dimly lit hall. A large, imposing man greeted us. Phantom Team B. I presumed this was the Daniel team they had mentioned before. I went to shake his hand. Forgive him. He can't shake hands. We're concerned about contamination, Alan said. We walked down a long corridor with several doors, and were led into a room where we were told we needed to be quarantined and screened. We sat on a sofa. Alan turned to me. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Yeah, starting with, who are you? Really? We're with the Secret Service. We report directly to the Pentagon. Wait, You work for the NTSB? I did. Promotion. Alan shrugged. We've been investigating the Bermuda Triangle incidents. Until now, it's either been complete disappearances, or well, like your case, the only difference is, you told someone. Otherwise, we might never have known. After the screening, we all rested. I slept. Well, no shadow figure, no fog. At 9:30 a.m., we were in a briefing room. There were 4 of us, plus a few men in military uniforms. A man who looked like he was in charge began. As you all know, our primary concern is the Bermuda Triangle. A tablet on the table flickered, highlighting the area on a map. Captain Daniel and his co-pilot, David, experienced something of great interest to us. Now, Captain Daniel, please tell us what happened. I stood and recounted the story again, secretly hoping no one would laugh. Instead, every face registered a mixture of fear and shock. Alan cleared his throat. Note, gentlemen, David reported no sightings of the entity beyond the initial encounter, so it appears this thing is now fixated on Daniel. Wait, you officials believe this? Too? I asked. The man in charge smiled and gestured to a scientist. The scientist stood and approached the podium. Captain Daniel, hello. First, let me assure you, we fully believe you. We have observed minor energy fluctuations around the Bermuda Triangle, and we discovered that the energy signature at your house deviated from the surrounding environment, which indicates something unusual occurred. Our current interest lies in the shadow figure you encountered. This is the element we don't understand yet. After the scientist finished, the man in charge spoke again. For the past few years, we've been monitoring the Bermuda Triangle. However, we haven't observed energy spikes like this until now. We've analyzed your amulet. We've decided you'll take it with you on the plane. We've also dedicated a satellite to monitor your movements. Is the energy large enough to create another world? I asked. We're not 100% sure, but that's our current theory. Our analysts tell me that there will be an energy spike at a specific point in the Bermuda Triangle during the full moon, which is at 9:30 night to night. That specific point is on my previous flight path. I asked. He nodded. For our departure, we were equipped with backpacks. Communication devices were thoroughly checked, and a bunch of final checks were performed. When I was led to the hangar, my jaw dropped. We would be traveling in a newly developed aircraft. It looked like a spaceship, with a sleek, streamlined design, somewhere between a commercial airliner and a helicopter. After a final comms check on our equipment, we were cleared for takeoff. I was co-pilot. The takeoff was incredibly smooth. Once airborne, the pilot grinned at us. I don't know if anyone told you, but this baby can go almost Mach 3. So buckle up. We flew at 10,000 meters to avoid other aircraft. As we reached our cruising altitude, I noticed the engine pitch change. The pilot came over the intercom. We were a few kilometers from entering the triangle. We strapped ourselves in, waiting for the inevitable. The aircraft decelerated and started to move slowly, something a normal plane couldn't do. Then, a violent jolt. The plane lurched to the right. We exchanged grim, determined looks. Then the plane righted itself. I looked outside. The clouds were forming a vortex, swirling slowly at first, then faster and faster. I checked my watch. 9:39. The red vortex looked like the gates of hell. Brace yourselves. We're going in, the pilot warned. The aircraft's nose dipped towards the vortex. The engines screamed. We shot towards the vortex like a bullet. My guess, the massive energy is creating a rip in space-time, Alan said. Then, the pilot reported, controls are no longer responding. This meant we'd lost contact with the ground. Almost immediately, the gray fog started to form outside the plane. As we fully traversed the vortex, I looked down. A red landscape greeted us. The same eerie sight as before, dark clouds, Blood-red sky, barren, rocky terrain. We conferred and decided to land. As the aircraft gently touched down, I felt a small measure of relief. At least it was solid ground, not some illusion. We donned protective suits and cautiously exited the aircraft. The landscape was desolate. The team set up energy detectors and cameras nearby. Alan handed me the box containing the amulet, told me to alert him if anything unusual happened while I had it nearby. We moved forward, scanning as we went. The wind whipped up red dust and sand. Visibility was low. Then the men in front shouted. They had found something. The wreckage of other aircraft, some dating back decades. This confirmed we weren't the first to enter this dimension. Most were commercial airliners. They must have crashed, unable to find a suitable runway. One of the team members was about to take pictures when the temperature plummeted. The shadow figure reappeared, much larger this time, looming over us. The team aimed their rifles at it, but it seemed unconcerned, just smiling, revealing its sharp teeth. "Oh, you're back," it said. "What are you?" The entity chuckled, claiming we would all stay here. "Where is Rachel?" At the mention of the name, the shadow figure's face shifted into Rachel's. At first, it wore the same horrific expression. Then its eyes softened. A wisp of gray fog, vaguely human-shaped, seemed to be struggling, trying to separate from the larger entity. "Daniel," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "This realization thingy, it feeds on human souls. Its energy, immense. It controls this realm. I've held on all these years, prevented it from fully consuming me by holding on to the thought of seeing you again. It had used that. Remember the amulet I gave you? Give it to me. I can buy you some time. Then, take your aircraft. Escape. Follow the gray fog." I was stunned, tears welling up in my own eyes. Then Peter yelled at me. "What are you waiting for? Throw it." I glanced at Peter, his own face streaked with tears. With trembling fingers, I tossed the amulet to Rachel. As she clutched it to her chest, both she and the shadow figure screamed in agony. Dark gray fog erupted from Rachel's chest. The shadow figure's glowing eyes were filled with hatred. "Retreat," Alan commanded. Peter grabbed me, pulled me towards the aircraft, sobbing as he dragged me along. I don't remember much after that. Just Alan saying we boarded the aircraft, followed the gray fog, found the vortex, and returned to the skies above Bermuda. The whole incident was classified. Alan and his team received commendations. I signed a stack of NDAs, took some time off, and returned to my normal life. Later, I asked Peter casually why he had been crying that day. Peter chuckled. "Seems Rachel was pretty good at keeping secrets. Never told anyone about my work in the Secret Service." He paused. "Rachel was my sister.